So here you are, on one hand, is trying to aspire to really do something. On the other hand, you're not allowed to be pretentious. And finally you say, F it. I don't care if I'm pretentious or not pretentious, or if I've done it or I haven't done it. All I know is that I am going to see this movie.
I think this experience is going to be, I hope, similar to all the things that he's done and just driven by just raw passion, which is what I love him for.
Look at my movie, you'll see what I'm talking.
Alright guys, this is going to be part 2 of our vid series, Everything We Know About Megalopolis, the upcoming sci-fi epic film from the great Francis Ford Coppola. Production wraps spring of 2023 for Megalopolis, and the film is most likely to hit theaters in 2024. If you haven't seen part 1, just click this link right up here to catch up. We talked about release info, the insane cast of this movie, how Coppola has unbelievably financed his own $100 million sci-fi epic, and of course, we talked about the story. Again, the brief synopsis from IMDb: an architect wants to rebuild New York City as a utopia following a devastating disaster. Alright, so let's get to part 2. As always, smash that like button, hit subscribe for more videos like this here on GMTV, gangster movies and television, mob news, mob history, all things organized crime. If it is organized, if it is crime, we're going to talk about it. If you haven't already, be sure to watch our recent vid series and our full spoiler review of Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. Speaking of great mob directors in their 80s being super ambitious and making giant epics at the end of their career. Alright guys, so Megalopolis. Today we're going to hit the Megalopolis tie-in graphic novel, how the movie has been a passion project for over 40 years for Francis Ford Coppola.
Oh wow.
Interviews with the cast and Coppola himself. Mike Figgis is doing a behind-the-scenes documentary. The very talented director Mike Figgis, who, fun fact, directed an episode of The Sopranos.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that. Some story information provided by Coppola in a 2022 interview with GQ. Finally, we have a Spike Lee post. Spike Lee posted to Instagram that he has seen Megalopolis, and so we're going to talk about his thoughts. All right, so a tie-in graphic novel? Coppola is speaking my language, man.
How do you say banana daiquiri?
Banana daiquiri.
Again, I mentioned last video that we're not going to spend too much time on this. This is a film channel, but it is part of the release, the graphic novel, and I am a huge comic nerd, so let's do this. News of the Megalopolis tie-in graphic novel came out of WonderCon 2023. This is from filmstage.com, and I got the link through IMDb. So other sites mention this news as well, beside Filmstage, but I wanted to confirm it through IMDb first. As announced at WonderCon 2023, Popverse reports the Sigizi, the comics publisher, will be releasing a graphic novel tie-in for Megalopolis, timed with its release in 2024. Coming from Sigizi co-founder Chris Ryle and artist Jacob Phillips, who were contacted by Coppola. They spent time on set developing this adaptation. The exciting thing is that I've only worked directly with him on this, Ryle said, talking about Coppola. This isn't the kind of thing where he licensed out the material. The movie and the book are solely his. We spent a few hours in Atlanta last month talking about not only his graphic novel, but the childhood comics he loved. And all the way along, he's been permissive and encouraging and telling us to make the book very much its own thing. So it's been kind of a stunning arrangement to get to work directly with someone of his stature on something like this. Yeah, stunning arrangement, I'll agree. You get to work with Coppola.
Look at my movie, you'll see what I'm talking.
You get to go to the set. I mean, a lot of times these adaptations, there's no direct contact between the writer, let alone the director, let alone visiting the set. I mean, Coppola is just going all out with this. I will also say, as a sci-fi fan, not just to plug my own channel, Above and Batman Beyond, but yeah, a future city sci-fi story is perfect for a graphic novel. So once again, while I might be a comic nerd, I am film first. And I think if a movie doesn't work for a comic, you shouldn't do the comic. Don't just do a comic for comic's sake. Again, this is a sci-fi epic. It's perfect for comics. The visuals are going to be unbelievable. It's going to be Blade Runner meets Julius Caesar, as we talked about in the last video. So yeah, ancient Rome meets utopian New York, visually, great. And also the long-term storytelling, the long form of comics, you know, it's a serialized medium. You can of course do one-shots, you can do miniseries. I'm guessing this is going to be a miniseries, but the point of a comic is also to be able to tap into a universe where you can really explore it lengthwise. You can really get into the years that go on. So year 1, year 2, you know, Batman year 1, Batgirl year 1, whatever character, year whatever, it works for comics because it's multiple years. Again, being an epic, because epics by genre typically take place over a few years or even decades, again, perfect for long form, serialized storytelling. So before we move on, here is some quick art from Sean Phillips to give you an idea of the potential for Megalopolis, the graphic novel. Or we're gonna do Megalopolis Year 1. The Dark Megalopolis returns. Okay, I'm done.
You and Francis Ford Coppola, you're doing another movie together.
Yes, I just finished working for him again on Megalopolis. He's been dreaming of making this movie since I was a kid.
All right, guys, so we mentioned this last video, but we're going to go deeper into it as a whole topic for this video because this is absolutely fascinating. Megalopolis is an over 40-year passion project for Coppola.
And you met him as a teenager?
We made Apocalypse Now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Apocalypse Now was 1979, so do the math.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from a GQ interview with Coppola in 2022. He interestingly talks about how filmmakers and writers often leapfrog and abandon projects. So you're working on one thing, while you're working on another thing, you get sick of the previous thing, so that's why you move on to the new thing. But then at some point you have to leapfrog back, finish the previous thing, so you're always in this state of abandoning and then going back. So worldofreal.com says Coppola began writing the film in the early 80s. It's a blog, take it with a grain of salt, but the timeline is feasible based on that quote from Laurence Fishburne.
Mm-hmm.
And World of Real goes on, in a May 2007 interview, Coppola even stated that he had to direct Bram Stoker's Dracula, Jack, and The Rainmaker to get out of debt and fund Megalopolis. That's how important this film is to him. You know, so last video we went into depth about how Coppola sold shares of his winery to finance Megalopolis. He talks about in this old interview that the film business is not a real business, meaning you can't depend on it financially to produce revenue in a consistent, again, reliable way.
The not real business is like the film business.
Whereas with a winery, with his name especially, and if you put in the work,
it really is a reliable business.
You can increase business, you can double business within a year's time. You can just constantly build money versus film where you can't really depend on that money. So apparently he was in a bunch of debt. I heard that he had filed for bankruptcy more than once. So there was a lot that he had to face financially in order to even think about Megalopolis. Interestingly, more like tragically, 9/11 caused him to put Megalopolis aside. Coppola actually started the process of testing actors in New York, all financed by his aforementioned mainstream Hollywood projects of the 90s.
Jack, directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
So back then, before he could sell the winery, he made these bigger movies to then finance movies that he actually wanted to make. Because the one kind of dependable stream of revenue that a director can tap into is mainstream movies. So if you do a giant Dracula movie,
I know where the bastard sleeps.
If you do a movie with
Robin Williams, unstoppable, in the story of a boy who made every moment count.
If you do these bigger films, you can actually depend on some kind of money. But these aren't, again, the projects that Coppola wants to do.
Chasing me through some blue inferno.
So for him, it felt more like work, which is interesting. I just find it so fascinating that most directors are probably killed to get onto projects like Dracula or to work with Robin Williams and all this stuff. He did say that he liked working with Robin Williams, but again, so funny that this is what he has to do. This is Coppola's grind, is showing up to set on a Dracula movie.
I brought him there. To Carfax Abbey.
This to him is like, this is his 9 to 5, is some major Hollywood motion picture that most people would kill to work on. So yeah, right after 9/11, you have a project that's supposed to be about this utopian New York City to start testing actors and starting the process of making a movie about a utopian New York when New York couldn't be less utopian. The vibes in New York, obviously, understandably, it was really depressing. You know, the last thing on anybody's mind was utopian New York. So it's pretty interesting that Coppola was like, you know what, even after making all this money, all the logistical things that we just talked about financially for Coppola to make Megalopolis start to happen, he still had to put it all aside respectfully, which is very honorable and ethical, I think, sensitive in a good way, you know, toward the victims and families of 9/11.
And then I'll be off to shoot Francis Ford Coppola's next film called Megalopolis.
All right, guys, so we've talked about a couple interviews with Coppola so far, but now we're going to get deeper into cast interviews. In addition to the interview with Laurence Fishburne on Megalopolis, we also have some interviews with Aubrey Plaza and Adam Driver, and a few more quotes from Coppola himself. From Adam Driver, quote, "Without hyperbole, one of the best shooting experiences of my life." This is paraphrasing Driver. You'd think with a project this auteur-driven, he'd be a control freak, but he's very open to the process, dictating the outcome, not only his own vision. And then finally, a direct quote, "I think what he's made is so visually stunning, but for such a big audience." Now, for Adam Driver to say without hyperbole, one of the best shooting experiences of my entire life, this is a guy who's pretty honest. He seems very honest. In his interviews, he seems very authentic. Speaking of 9/11, he did a 2015 TED Talk.
In the military and theater communities are actually very similar.
And he was so authentic about his military background, in fact. It says, this is from military.com, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Adam Driver and all of his friends declared they would join the military as soon as they could. Driver was the only one who followed through, joining the Marine Corps. And this is from Driver directly in the TED Talk. It was one of the things I'm most proud of having done in my life, he said. In that TED Talk, he's, again, very honest about his military background, kind of the phony sides of acting and learning how to act, and those acting 101 exercises that can be kind of cheesy, all that stuff. Again, he's very honest about it, so he doesn't seem pretentious. So for him to say, once again, back to this quote, back to Megalopolis, for Adam Driver to say, without hyperbole, one of the best shooting experiences of my life. He's been on a lot of sets, and I don't think he would say, especially starting it off without hyperbole, I would think that says something. And then with this idea of Coppola being auteur driven, he could be a total control freak. It makes all the sense in the world that he would be. It's all his money. I mean, down to the money. Down to the $120 million this guy spent on this movie. It's literally his money. So he's controlling not only things like Final Cut and just everything, but even down to the money. So he could be like, you're wasting my money. Whereas Adam Driver in the interview says he was very open to, again, the process dictating the outcome, not his own vision. So he would show up to set, and if something was slightly different than what he had in his vision on the day, he would allow that to play out, because to him it's the process, not the vision. With auteur-driven projects, these people are so obsessed with their vision, and rightfully so. I mean, they put a lot into it, and if you are on an auteur project, you need to understand that the director is probably going to have a very specific vision and be driven mostly by that. Maybe not mostly, but you know what I mean, a lot by that. So for Coppola to have this perspective, especially at his age, with his money, his own money, can't get over that. It's pretty cool that he's open, once again, to the, as Canadians would say, the process. So here's Aubrey Plaza.
He's just so passionate. I think it's so inspiring to know his process and to have seen his films, and to know just how on such a deep level where they're coming from. And I think this experience is going to be, I hope, similar to all the things that he's done, and just driven by just raw passion, which is what I love him for.
Yeah, I mean, to be 80 and still have that passion, and for it to be infectious to someone as young as Aubrey Plaza, that says something about a true artist. People oftentimes with age, they get soft, they get whatever, not as passionate. Coppola has no reason to be impressed by Hollywood. And even when he was at his height, he didn't even work within the Hollywood system. He was always this outside Hollywood auteur guy. So there is nothing for him, nothing impresses The Godfather, or nothing would have to, let's say. But he still loves the medium, he still loves being an artist, and again, that passion for something that you stay obsessed with something for over 40 years. I mean, that's longer than I have been alive. This guy has been thinking about one of his projects. So I can't imagine what that feels like. Might even feel like raising a kid in real time. Like you have a 40-year-old child.
No, the 40-year-old kid behind you.
All this love, but now it's finally born.
However, his cells are developing at 4 times the normal rate.
Weird analogy, so let's not use that, but that's fine. All right, so now we have an interview with the legend, Jon Voight. So this is from Jon Voight on Megalopolis. It's a work of imagination that's quite stunning, I think. Working with great actors, Adam Driver, Shia LaBeouf, Aubrey Plaza, these are 3 enormous talents from this generation. It's a brave attempt at something that comes from the mind of this great Francis Coppola that I hope he will achieve the vision he set out to achieve. Again, at Coppola's age, to be that imaginative, to not just go through the motions of, all right, let's direct this, let's do that.
I will give it my full attention.
And then again, to also even have control over that, to have the humility of saying, not only am I passionate and super old and have this very specific vision, but as Adam Driver said, he's also even open within that to not be a complete dictator. So these are all really admirable. Like, he's dancing a big tightrope here, I think, Coppola, with all of these factors, with his age, with, again, this being auteur driven, his money, the subject matter, the actors he's working with. It's a big tightrope. He could totally just be a total dick on set. Most people probably wouldn't even care because it's, I'm working for The Godfather.
You're not my father!
But he's not doing any of that. So I think it's really interesting. And especially to get that kind of feedback from Jon Voight, who has been in the business for over 50 years. This is a legend. And this guy is, I know legend might be overused, but it's Jon Voight. So it's okay to say legend. And also, again, on the topic of age, he doesn't really have to say anything he doesn't mean. Of course, he has to put on somewhat of a character when he does press, but these are all really big compliments from a guy like Jon Voight. I also love his use of the word brave, a brave attempt at something that comes from the mind of this great Francis Coppola. Because it is brave. brave. I mean, even though he is in his 80s, Coppola, this could be a real whimper. I mean, this could go out with a whimper.
No.
I haven't said this so far, and I kind of want to make a video just about it to be kind of funny, but also to be realistic. Like, what if this movie sucks? What if Megalopolis sucks? He put over $100 million of his money into this thing. All these actors, this whole thing, you know, I'm spending half my life making this 2-video series with editing and everything. What if all of this, everyone's just kind of assuming this is going to be amazing because it's Coppola? Not everyone, but you know what I mean. There's this feeling in the air of how could this go wrong? That's why I think he is brave, because there's always a possibility, especially coming from a guy like Jon Voight. He probably knows the feeling of being part of more than a few stinkers, movie-wise. Could suck, which would be, again, kind of funny. So look forward to a video on what if Megalopolis sucks? What does $100 million look like when it's flushed down a toilet?
All right, okay,
All right, so let's talk about how Mike Figgis is doing a behind-the-scenes doc on Megalopolis. As we mentioned in part 1, it was actually Figgis who said Julius Caesar meets Blade Runner to describe the story of Megalopolis. Figgis was a guest of honor at the Ischia Global Film Festival. I'm assuming that's in Italy, the island of Ischia, right near Naples. So similar to what we've heard about the synopsis so far, according to Figgis, it is a futuristic film set in New York that will be called New Rome. At the center, an architect who wants to build the utopian metropolis after a devastating disaster. It's very philosophical, but also veers toward political satire. Francis is obsessed with Roman history, its roots. So on Figgis's process of making the Megalopolis documentary, quote, I will document everything from our chats to the long waits on the huge set, and this is from the Far Out website. Figgis's Megalopolis documentary will likely be released alongside the main film itself and will feature interviews with the likes of Martin Scorsese, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. So before we get into the specifics of these quotes, Figgis, once again, is known for directing Leaving Las Vegas, and then also, for our show here, GMTV, also directed an episode of The Sopranos.
No.
Yeah.
He did some really cool camera work, some editing stuff, flourishes and artistic stuff. While Sopranos was an art-driven show, let's call it, not necessarily mainstream television, like they would do artsy stuff with camera work and editing and sound and stuff, but Figgis he did this really cool handheld push, which is a very rare thing to do. And from what I heard, he was operating actually some of the cameras in Sopranos. And he also did that famous freeze frame in that episode of The Sopranos when Carmela says,
I'm going back with my husband.
Oh.
That was Mike Figgis. According to World of Real, Figgis met Coppola through directing his nephew Nick Cage in Leaving Las Vegas. We talked last video how so much of the Coppola family is very famous, Nick Cage being one of them. So from World of Real, he says he was there for the whole 5-month shoot. 5 months, talking to Coppola about the whole production process as it was happening. And at the time of this Figgis interview, in July of 23, quote, Coppola just finished shooting extra scenes on the border between Italy and Switzerland. This film is still in the editing phase in Atlanta, Georgia. Alright guys, so now we're going to move on to this 2022 GQ interview with Coppola. I chose this interview for this part 2 video because it goes much deeper into the story of Megalopolis than many of the other interviews I found on the film. And real quick, before jumping into the story itself, Coppola said something really admirable as an artist. Paraphrasing, it says he had worked in a number of different genres, from gangster movies, represent, to drama and so on. But for this project, for Megalopolis, he wanted to create something completely from scratch, specifically in order to find what his own style was. I find this admirable because, as we talked about before, while it may be many filmmakers' dream just to be able to direct a big budget movie, such opportunities became no longer satisfying to Coppola artistically. Hence why he wrote and created Megalopolis entirely himself, from the ground up, with zero artistic or studio interference. Alright guys, so back to the story. Here's what Coppola said about the historical influences of ancient Rome we talked about in part 1 of this video. And before we get deeper into the quotes, here's a quick paraphrase summary of what he's about to say. Megalopolis is a philosophical battle between tradition and futurism, based on a real historical period during the Roman Empire. Alright, so let's get deeper into it with the quotes. I became interested in a little peculiar wrinkle in history known as the Catiline Conspiracy. The Catiline Conspiracy was a story of someone whose position was very classical and old, that the old traditions are good, versus someone who was more of a futurist and we should leap over the old ideas and into the new. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if you made a Roman epic but didn't set it in ancient Rome, set it in modern New York? Big New York story in which a Catiline and a Cicero, or the mayor and the architect, are at odds. So that's our philosophical and historical basis for Megalopolis. Now let's hear what Coppola has to say about the love story side of things.
All right.
Building on this idea of the mayor and architect characters at odds, Coppola continues. And what if there was a girl? What if there was a daughter of the mayor who came to be in love with the opponent of the mayor? So I pieced together this sort of piece that would be a love story, which I wanted to make so bad. A really heartbreaking, moving love story, but also a story of the debate between those who believe that the way to go is to leap into the future, and then those who believe we should secure the security of the past. So it seems we've found one of the main themes of Megalopolis here, if not the main theme: tradition versus futurism. Do we hold up the ideals and morals and traditions of the past as that which is good, or should we focus more on building the future and looking forward instead of backward? Alright guys, so before we go, we have a pretty fun Instagram post from Spike Lee, the great Spike Lee, commenting on what he's seen of Megalopolis. So this is again from Spike on Instagram. A lot of capital letters, as you can see. I just spent the day with one of my cinema fathers, the great Francis Ford Coppola. Flew down from NYC this morning to Hotlanta. Francis was gracious to sign a bunch of Godfather 1 and 2 posters and books. Lucky. But da bomb diggity was Francis screened 30 minutes of his new opus, he meant to say Megalopolis, for me. OMG, amazing. Thank you, Francis. Peace and love, Spike. I just love that Coppola hangs out and shows his films to other directors like Spike. I say like Spike because the two styles of these directors are so vastly different, but greatness recognizes greatness, I guess. Alright guys, so that is officially everything we know about Coppola's Megalopolis. Well, not everything of course, there's always more to dive into, but that's all the big stuff. Don't forget to go back and watch part 1 of this same video covering a whole bunch more on the movie. Next video, we're continuing with Megalopolis, but now that we've covered all the big stuff, we're transitioning into more specific topics, and the next one will be image breakdowns of what we've seen so far from the film. Set photos, behind the scenes, costuming, and more. Images you've seen throughout these 2 videos, but now again, we're going to break them down. And finally, check out our recent vid series and full spoiler review on Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. Right here on GMTV.